The reboot of Lost in early January 2004 under the helm of J.J. Abrams and Damon Lindelof caused quite a stir at the network, especially because the tension between Braun and his colleagues had not improved during this eventful time. Even though the costs for the project skyrocketed and resistance grew, it was already too late to stop the production of the pilot. Even in these unusual circumstances and the weird position that Abrams and Lindelof found themselves in, they were not completely at liberty to do whatever they wanted to do. What criticisms did they have to face, and what changes needed to be made? And what consequences did Lloyd Braun have to endure for all of this? Despite the difficult situation at Disney and ABC, there was no time to waste. After having made a lot of progress at a very high pace, Abrams, Lindelof, and their entire crew still had a lot to do. As hectic and unconventional as the development process was, they had no way to completely avoid the so-called network notes. That process alone can take weeks or even months, as seen with the work Jeffrey Lieber had done, who had to rewrite and overhaul his scripts several times, simply because the people who pay the bills would also like to have a say before something gets approved or produced. These creative interventions are often condemned for being rather silly, but can also be extremely useful. What can be said with relative certainty in this case is that the Lost pilot might have been rewritten drastically if it had gone through the normal development cycle. When Abrams and Lindelof were eventually called up on February 26, 2004 to get feedback for their script, some executives weren't necessarily happy with what they read. There were quite a few reasons why their work was not met with much love. One example was the drug use of Charlie, with their request that his drugs would not change his behavior at all. Another point of contention was the existence of the polar bear on the island, with the concern that this would push Lost towards the famous H.G. Wells novel, The Island of Dr. Moreau. But despite all the objections and concessions to the sci-fi and mystery elements, there was one aspect that had nothing to do with monsters, drugs, French transmissions, or polar bears: the end of Act 2 and the death of Jack. The note was simple and clear: don't lose Jack. What was once supposed to be a big twist to shock the audience and to teach them that nobody on the island is safe, now had to be rewritten. One comparison was to the Hitchcock classic Psycho, in which the apparent main character also gets killed off halfway through the movie. The difference being that Psycho was just a movie, and Lost was going to be a long-running TV series where the viewers would need to have a sense of security. If Jack was actually going to die, nobody would latch on to the characters. At least, that's what executives like Stephen McPherson reportedly thought. Further notes stated that without Jack, only low-life guys would be left as leading men, that Jack and Kate's relationship brought hope and humor to the story that wasn't present without him, and that the show would have more male appeal with a man and woman dynamic instead of a singular female leader. This meant that they had to find a replacement for Michael Keaton because he was simply not interested in committing himself to a TV show on a permanent basis. Abrams and Lindelof therefore had to make some changes to the script to accommodate this. To rewrite the whole plot again for Jack was basically impossible, especially due to time constraints as production was scheduled to start in less than 2 weeks. Jack's survival, nevertheless, triggered a small chain reaction with bigger consequences. The first real change materialized during the hike to the cockpit, at which Jack, Kate, and Charlie were still supposed to get into trouble with the monster. In order to maintain the deadly threat of the island, it was now the pilot who had to fall victim to the mysterious creature. Jack was then given a new task so that his character wasn't wasted for the rest of the pilot, which meant he was now going to make use of his medical skills by caring for the critically injured Marshall, who was extraditing Kate from Australia to the United States. Originally, the Marshal survived for just a few moments in the first draft, but was now going to die by the end of the second hour of the pilot. Hurley, who was supposed to join Kate for her next trip to send a distress signal from higher ground, was then removed from that group and promoted to Jack's assistant to help him with the Marshal. The storyboards that are dated March 2, 2004 actually still show him being part of that group. With Hurley gone from that trip, the upcoming landslide sequence also had to go, which meant the only real danger that was left for Kate's group was the attacking polar bear. The revised version of the script was completed on March 3rd, again rewritten for the forthcoming filming on March 9th and 16th, continuously being updated until April 19th and split into 7 acts for more commercial breaks. With a more or less finished script in their hands, they were now able to finalize the casting, which had been going on for a few weeks. The cast list at last included a total of 13 main characters and numerous guest roles, much more than they were initially allowed. The casting, however, didn't always work out the way they wanted. Michael Keaton wasn't the only actor on their wish list that ultimately didn't end up on the show. Justin Theroux, for example, was another high-profile actor that they were interested in, as he was now one of their candidates to take over for Keaton to play Jack. Theroux, however, declined and had no interest in being on the show. Scott Glenn, on the other hand, was on their list to play the enigmatic Locke, who would only have one short scene in the pilot. He also had to decline as he already had a role in the CBS pilot Wanted and the upcoming stage play Finishing the Picture that would premiere in September 2004. While searching for an actress to play Kate, they had to face another challenge, the network. According to casting director April Webster, more than 200 actresses read for the role that was once supposed to be front and center. Initially, Kerry Washington was their favorite after she auditioned. The higher-ups were, however, not going to allow her to take on that part of the ensemble. In their continued search, they found Kobe Smulders, who was among the final 2 candidates to play Kate. She, however, did not come out on top and later had her breakthrough in the comedy series How I Met Your Mother. This was similar to the experience of John Hamm, who auditioned for the role of Jack, now the centerpiece of the story. He would later, though, find his success on Mad Men, just like Christina Hendricks, who also auditioned for Lost. Another famous actor who tried to end up on the island was Terrence Howard. He auditioned to play Michael, the father who didn't yet know how to be a father. Also close to being part of the cast was Kate Mara. After a few weeks, and for some just a few days before cameras were supposed to roll, they settled on the following actors. Jack, the leader of the survivors, would be played by Matthew Fox. He originally auditioned to play Sawyer.
I was born in Pittsburgh. Father died when I was 2, mother died when I was 5. Moved to Buffalo. Lived with my aunt and my uncle. She sat around on her fat ass all day long while he ran scams.
He was apparently good enough to be invited back again. Kate would be played by Evangeline Lilly. It turned out to be her first actual acting gig after only working as a model and extra in some productions and commercials to earn some money while she was studying.
Junior VP of Marketing and Business Development for Brad Harris.
What's Brad Harris?
We're the leading providers of business logic integration solutions.
Well, that'll come in handy here.
Charlie, the final piece of the trio that the pilot would be centered around, would be portrayed by Dominic Monaghan, at that point mostly known for his part in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. He read a dialogue between Charlie and Kate after the death of Jack. As he later elaborated on, the casting process was, at least in his case, more or less just an opportunity to get to know each other.
I went in for a general audition and sat down with JJ and his partner, Brian Burke, and we just talked about English comedy for like 45 minutes. Talked about Monty Python and Eddie Izzard and the Goons and the Goodies and Derek and Clive, and we did this whole thing. We were doing impressions for each other. No audition, and I left. I called my agent, and he was like, "How did it go?" And I was like, "It went well, but we didn't talk about the show. We just talked about comedy and goofed around and stuff." And he was like, "All right, cool."
The character was then again rewritten for him. While he was initially modeled after the young musician Larry Underwood from Stephen King's The Stand, and described as being in his 20s in the original outline, he was then supposed to be a burned-out rock star from the 80s, and, according to the first draft of the script, 42 years old. With Monaghan now on board, the role reverted back to its original state. The hiring of Josh Holloway for the role of Sawyer is another example of the flexibility during the casting. He was originally envisioned as a slick con man with an expensive watch and Prada suit from Buffalo, New York. Although he kept his name and profession, he took over the characteristics of another separate character named Henry, who was described as wiry, lean, in his 40s with a southern accent, and who initially also shot the boar before it was turned into the polar bear.
You want to know about me?
Oh, yeah. Sure, if you like.
I was born in Pittsburgh. Father died when I was 2, mother when I was 4. Moved to Buffalo. Lived with my aunt and uncle. She sat around on her fat ass all day while he ran scams.
Ian Somerhalder was cast as Boone, a new character that didn't yet exist in the original outline.
As if I'm going to start eating chocolate.
While interfering with your eating disorders is not something I aspire to, I hope you realize it could be a couple days before the rescue team finds us. Maybe possibly a few, so you're looking at like 72
Well,
hours.
thank you. I know how long 2 or 3 days is. And as if we're not going to get rescued.
I'm not saying we're not. Just... I was looking out the window and went down, naturally, and for 6 hours outside of Sydney, there's nothing out there. There's nothing. It's just water.
Of course they'll find us. The plane had a black box, idiot.
Maggie Grace got the role of his stepsister Shannon. According to the sides that were written for her, she actually only had a sister called Donna, which she described as God's frigging gift to humanity, a line she then used to describe Boone.
You're sitting on your ass staring at bodies. Come on.
I've just been through a freaking trauma here, okay?
We've all been through a trauma. The difference is that since the crash, you've actually given yourself a pedicure.
You know what? It is so easy for you to make fun of me, and you're really good at it. I get it, okay? Well, screw you.
The casting of Locke was a rather complicated case, because the character barely existed. While there was a Locke in the original outline, he was described as a 25-year-old, entitled, and arrogant businessman. The new Locke was a completely overhauled and very nebulous figure, played by a veteran actor, Terry O'Quinn. He was the only actor who didn't audition for the role and was cast based on his previous work with Abrams on Alias. British actor Naveen Andrews signed up for the role of Saeed, who was already a much more fleshed-out character and originally described as a Middle Eastern techno-wonk who up till now thought his 10 years of getting his engineering degree were completely useless in the wild. According to the storyboards and other internal documents, he was still named Doc Johnny until March 10, 2004, just 1 day before filming was scheduled to begin.
Some people have problems.
Yeah, some people have problems. Us. Him.
Us.
You're okay. I like you.
You're okay too.
How do you know how to do all that?
I was a military communications officer.
Yeah? You ever see battle?
Oh yes. I fought in the Gulf War.
No way. I have a buddy fought over there. He was in the 104th Airborne. Were you in the Air Force, Army?
The Republican Guard.
The cast grew even more internationally when they hired Yoonjin Kim to play Sun. Kim, who was already under contract with ABC, originally read for Kate, and impressed them so much that they created a new character for her.
They're back. Where's the doctor?
The doctor's gone.
He's dead. That man died?
Does anyone know how to use this?
Hi, can I, okay. Yeah, this is a dual-band walkie, military spec. Looks like it broadcasts both FM and satellite bandwidths. It's not in very good shape. Hello? 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 Hello?
Can you get it to work?
I don't know. I mean, I'll look at it, but maybe you say hello a couple of hundred more times. That'd be good.
Before that, Abrams and Lindelof had already intended to have foreign people on the plane that didn't understand English, temporarily a German or an older Japanese couple. They simply adapted to the new Korean cast member and created her husband, Jin, played by Daniel Dae Kim. He was one of the last actors to join the production.
이거 잡숴보세요. 특별히 당신에게는 필요해요. 이거 한번 먹어봐야 돼요. 알겠어요? 한번 가져가세요. 한 번만. 옳지, 옳지. 맛있지요? 많이 잡수세요.
Oh my God.
왜요? 뭐 괜찮아요?
I felt it. Come here.
왜? 하지 마세요. 싫어요.
Oh, can you feel there's a kick? That's the foot. Right here.
손 놔주세요.
Thank you. Thank you.
One of the earliest hirings, on the other hand, was Jorge Garcia for the role of Hurley. Garcia was actually discovered on the February 8, 2004 episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm in a small role as a drug dealer next to the show's creator, Larry David.
What exactly were you thinking of? A little weed going, you know? Some weed.
Yeah, I got it, yeah. You know, first of all, you can calm down a little.
Sure.
Just, you know, relax. Just
No, I'm
create the illusion that we're friends talking here, all right?
What are you kidding me? You know what? You're 100% right.
That's too much. All right, okay, you're doing fine, all right?
With Garcia securing the role, the character made a rather dramatic transformation. While he initially was described as heavyset, he was also supposed to be an NRA redneck in his 50s with a receding hairline. Another big difference was the change of his status from being a red shirt to a main character, but as Garcia revealed, he didn't even know what the term red shirt in the character description meant, thinking that he would actually be wearing a red shirt. Harold Perrineau was then cast as Michael, the father of Walt.
Talks in Spanish. You Spanish?
No, I found it.
Look, man. Listen, hey. I need some help here, all right? I don't know how to do this yet.
His estranged son and final member of the cast was Walt, portrayed by Malcolm David Kelly.
Backgammon is the oldest game, much older than chess. Archaeologists found sets when they excavated the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. Would you like to guess how old they were?
100 years?
5,000 years. Yeah, that's older than Jesus Christ.
Did they have dice and stuff?
Yes, but theirs weren't made of plastic. Their dice were made of bones. The Persians called it taktegnard, which means battle on wood. 2 players, 2 sides. One is white, one is black.
Furthermore, there were going to be 3 guest appearances in the pilot. The first one was Claire, a young pregnant woman, played by Emily de Ravin. The original idea for her was that she was a surrogate mother for her best friend, while she herself wanted a child of her own. Her being credited as a guest star was, however, more or less just a way to get around their cast limit.
Yeah. Turns out Ruth's medical stuff more or less made it a scientific impossibility.
So
she can't carry a child.
So you offered?
Yeah, of course. Anyway, when people used to ask me if I know what the baby was going to be, I'd get all excited for my friend and I'd say I didn't know, but I could imagine a beautiful little baby Ruthie or a cute little Stu. Now, the truth is, I'm sort of terrified.
Frederick Lane finally got the role of the Marshal, who would be extraditing Kate to the U.S. Laverne Scott Caldwell was ultimately cast in the role of Rose, an elderly woman that was originally supposed to die early on in the pilot. Her character was, as many others, rewritten. Instead of creating a whole new backstory for her, she was actually just given Kate's rejected story of having just been on her honeymoon with her husband. Even the small detail that Kate always had to remove her wedding ring because her finger swelled during a flight was recycled and given to Rose's husband. In addition, Abrams' childhood friend, Greg Grunberg, stepped in to have an extended cameo as the pilot, taking over for Jack to be killed by the monster. Cindy, the stewardess, that would give Jack an extra bottle of vodka, would be played by Kimberly Joseph. And last but not least, there was Walt's dog Vincent, formerly known as Bruce and Tigger, portrayed by the yellow Labrador Madison, who is actually a female dog. According to her owner and trainer, Kim Stahl, the casting lasted just about 10 minutes. Besides these actors, they of course also needed a lot of extras, stand-ins, and stuntmen and women. Paul Edney, one of the extras, created a website solely dedicated to all the survivors in the background. Faith Faye, one of the extras and known as Sexy Blue Striped Shirt Girl, even gained a small fan group. The stand-ins, however, were never supposed to be actually seen on screen, as their job was to be on set so that the camera and lighting could be properly set up while the actors were still in the makeup department and preparing for the shoot. Model Claudia Cox, for example, was the stand-in for Evangeline Lilly. They even became good friends and lived together. Marilyn Giacomazzi, on the other hand, worked as Lily's stunt double to protect her from possible injuries. Lily was somewhat disheartened by that, as she was looking forward to doing her own stunts, especially since she loved climbing trees. The rewriting of the script was thus a major disappointment for her since she was no longer going to climb up to Jack's body to retrieve the transceiver. The stunts were performed under the supervision of stunt coordinator Greg Smers, who was, however, involved in more scenes than one might suspect. With his crew, he even designed and built a special camera suspension to film the trio of Jack, Kate, and Charlie fleeing the monster from a flying position. Michael Bonvillain, who had worked with Abrams before, was originally supposed to be the cinematographer, but since he was already occupied on another film, Abrams turned to his childhood friend Larry Fong to take over those duties. Abrams was, however, met with resistance again for this choice, as Fong had little experience apart from working on a few music videos. Eventually, Fong was allowed to take the job.
But he really fought hard to get Larry to be allowed to shoot the pilot of Lost. There was a huge resistance to him at the studio.
I had to meet the executives. I have not done a lot of TV. It was a very difficult interview. I was sweating. We see nothing in your resume that says you could possibly pull off something like Lost. All I know is I've known JJ for 25 years. We have a common vocabulary. I know what he likes. I have photographic skills, and I think I could help him make his vision.
Fong also received support from other cinematographers and camera operators such as Douglas Olivares and Gregory Lunsgaard, who had already been involved in countless productions. Lunsgaard, for example, sat behind the camera for Castaway. David Bar-Yaffe and his crew were responsible for production sound mixing. His job was to choose the right equipment in every situation on the set and to configure it to record the sound as clearly as possible without any annoying background noise, which may seem easier than it really is. Filming on the beach stands out as an especially great challenge, because the image of a lonely island easily creates the illusion that there is no civilization around, when it is in fact in the immediate vicinity, including passing airplanes and traffic noise. But even roadblocks don't help against the sound of the sea, which would have to be filtered out to keep the dialogue recordings as intelligible as possible. The dialogue was also the main focus of script coordinator Dawn Gilliam, who was always going to be by Abrams' side at the so-called Video Village with the most recent script in her hand. Her job was not only to pay attention to the dialogue and continuity, but also to make notes during the production, including which takes should be used later in the editing room. In addition to the whole cast and crew, they also needed an elaborate filming schedule for the upcoming production, so that the script can be realized as quickly and efficiently as possible, especially with projects that are as big as Lost, where several hundred people have to work together like a well-oiled machine. Responsible for this daunting task was Unit Production Manager Gene Higgins. According to the plan, production was now set to begin with a slight delay on March 11, 2004, and continue until April 23, 2004, with 6 days of filming each week. To have a successful plan, many factors that could impede or interfere with the filming had to be taken into account. In particular, the weather in Hawaii can be very unpredictable, and since Lost is going to be filmed on location and not on sets, they're going to be exposed to rain and wind, which meant they would have to be flexible and able to improvise. Heavy rains caused a lot of chaos on Oahu at the end of February and the beginning of March, and was therefore not a good omen for the shooting. Another very important factor were the set pieces for the airplane that were needed to realize the spectacular crash sequence. In total, 3 sets were needed for the pilot. The first set was located near Los Angeles at Air Hollywood, a production studio founded in 2001 by Talat Captain, which specializes in providing various aircraft models for film and television, and even offers courses to help with the fear of flying. The situation there was pretty convenient because the planes were very modular, could be rebuilt rather quickly, and provided a lot of space for the cast and crew. The flashback sequences that were going to focus on the final minutes of the flight were going to be filmed here, and thus the only scenes of the entire pilot where they were protected from outside interference. In contrast to the comfort at Air Hollywood, it was a challenge to turn the Lockheed L-1011 N783DL into the wreck of the crashed Oceanic Airlines plane. Since the 3 freighters with all the parts wouldn't arrive on Oahu before March 10th and then would proceed into construction, they wouldn't be able to use the sets for a while. To get things done nonetheless, the cockpit and fuselage were set up at the same time under the directions of construction coordinators Dale DeStefani and William Gideon. The cockpit was transported to the jungle at Heiakea, where they also applied the Oceanic Airlines logo by designer Diane Chadwick. Even the seats had to be removed and dressed with new covers to match the interiors of the plane set in Los Angeles. This was the responsibility of set decorator Rick Romer, who began working on the pilot on March 15th. This set was completed on March 26th. The heavily damaged fuselage on Molokai Beach required even more time and a lot of ingenuity. The wing, that was still intact, for example, had to be balanced with enormous steel plates and furthermore stabilized with a crane. Other parts of the wreckage, such as the turbine, were luckily less of a problem since the inner parts would later be added with the help of computer graphics as part of a huge explosion. Romer was also busy trying to decorate the set authentically. It was down to the wire and not possible to shoot here until April 3rd. Concerned residents even had to be informed that this was not a real crash, but a movie set. Those sets also had to be prepared for the visual effects, that is, all of the non-computer effects, artificial rain, wind, and explosions. This was done under the supervision of industry veteran Archie Ahuna. After a few very turbulent weeks, production eventually began on March 11, 2004 at Air Hollywood. But even that didn't quite go according to plan, as Evangeline Lilly had not yet received her work permit. Her scenes then had to be postponed for a few days while they were also starting to look for other actresses to replace her in case things didn't work out. Instead, it was Dominic Monaghan's turn to shoot Charlie's flashback. Next in line was Matthew Fox, who filmed Jack's flashback the next day. Unlike Monaghan, he had rather little to do, as Jack actually fastened his seatbelt and was consequently not flung through the air. After a short break over the weekend, Lily finally received her permit and filming could continue with her playing Kate. She was actually so committed to her acting that she hurt herself with the handcuffs.
These are the hands that wrestled with metal all day. And they have the scars to show it. My wrists are like twice the size they normally are.
Overnight, the rear of the aircraft was removed and replaced with a large green screen so that the spectacular crash in which the aircraft is torn apart could be implemented. While the actors got a short break, the crew directly left for Oahu to do the tech scouting to prepare the next stages of filming, scheduled to begin March 22nd. Since the plane sets were not yet ready, they had to start with the scenes that didn't require them. The focus of the production was still on Jack, Kate, and Charlie, who were running from the monster for 2 days in the cold weather and artificial rain, always supported by their stuntmen and women. Filming took place along the old Pali Road in Nu'uanu Valley and the northern Turtle Bay Resort. In order to keep the actors in focus during their escape, Abrams used a rather simple trick.
The shot of them running, the three of them, and it would have been funny because they weren't running, they were just standing in place, going like this, three of them in a row, and we were shaking the camera, and it looks like they're running. It looked almost as good as this.
This side, right here.
And shake the camera like little shakes, like that.
Okay, wait. You do this, I'll be behind you.
Okay, ready? Here we go.
On March 25th, they eventually tackled the actual opening sequence for the pilot, in which Jack wakes up in the jungle after the crash. This was also the first day for Madison and her trainer, who was off-screen to give her instructions with a tennis ball. This was filmed in the Honolulu Watershed Forest Reserve. Subsequently, Lily and Monaghan got to know some of their new colleagues for the first time when they prepared for the next 2 days of filming that took place at the impressive coconut plantation on the Dillingham Ranch in Waikane Valley. There, they tried to film the dramatic polar bear attack, which didn't exactly turn out the way they had hoped. The polar bear itself, for example, looked great, but it was much smaller than expected, not as big as the shipping crate suggested, which left Abrams disappointed. The actual problem was, however, the charging attack, for which they had to launch the bear through the air and throw a pillow at the actors, as Josh Holloway described it.
And cut.
In addition to those problems, they also had to improvise for the shots in which the bear was running through the grass, as the dummy wasn't completely usable for this. As a result, someone had to dress up and pretend to be the bear instead. Visual effects supervisor Kevin Blank eventually stepped up and volunteered to get his own little cameo.
They strapped on polar bear chaps, and we went over to this little dense green area, and I was hopping through the jungle trying to mimic a four-legged run.
After that, they could finally move over to the cockpit set in He'eia. One problem here was that there was barely any room for the cast, crew, and equipment, which meant they even had to film some takes from outside through the window. This was also the time for Abrams' kindergarten friend Greg Grunberg to make his guest appearance as the pilot. It was, however, not him who got pulled out by the monster, but his stuntman Jake Brake, whose legs actually got somewhat mangled during the stunt. Dane Farwell furthermore played his dead co-pilot that falls out of the cabin. The biggest problem, though, was the bad weather that hindered the production, because eventually the heavy rain flooded the whole set. To get things working again, they had to improvise and buy lots of blow dryers. The rain, however, did have a positive side, as it provided a reflection of the dead pilot that was hanging in the tree, which resulted in a great shot that was not originally planned. On March 27th, a party was held at the Ilikai Hotel for the cast and crew to celebrate the first week of filming on Oahu. It was not until April 3rd that production moved to Mokuleia Beach, where the fuselage set the stage for the immediate chaos after the crash. Most things went according to plan, like for example the filming of stuntman Frank Torres, who was sucked into the turbine causing an explosion. The explosions of the turbine and wing were filmed on April 6th and 7th, respectively. While there were no real problems with those scenes by themselves, the direct aftermath was struck by a little incident as the mount for a piece of debris didn't withstand the fire and dropped earlier than intended. Monahan was, however, never actually in danger since he was far enough away from the point of impact. In addition to those action scenes, there was also the first appearance of the monster, which made itself known to the survivors during their very first night on the island. To achieve the effect of bending trees, they had to use a blue screen and add the trees later in post-production. Perhaps more important for a successful pilot are the character moments to give them a deeper profile and make them more interesting. One of those scenes was the first appearance of Sawyer, with his rather rugged demeanor, who didn't intend to make friends. In the meantime, production also moved from Mokuleia Beach to Waiale'e Beach, where they filmed smaller scenes like Kate sewing up Jack's wound, Kate cleaning herself, and Jin fishing. From April 15th to April 17th, they left for the famous Kualoa Ranch, where the hike to the cockpit by Jack, Kate, and Charlie was going to take place, with Vincent watching the trio from afar. This was also the same location as the final scene of the pilot, in which Saeed picks up the French distress signal that was broadcasted for over 16 years, leaving the survivors shocked. This was actually supposed to be shot at higher ground, but they had to adapt again due to the weather not allowing it. Filming ultimately wrapped in the early hours of April 24th back on Mokuleia Beach, with Jorge Garcia playing Hurley, handing out food to some of the survivors on the first evening on the island. To conclude the 6 long weeks, Abrams' shorts were ceremonially burned as they were supposedly responsible for the bad weather that the cast and crew had to endure.
It wasn't the easiest shoot in the world. The weather was tricky at times, but the crew has been amazing, the cast has been amazing, the attitude has been amazing, so it's fully realized, the script, it's unbelievable, it's every writer's dream.
It's just the most amazing working experience I've ever had on every level. I'm very, very proud to be involved in it.
The public, however, knew only very little about the project itself. Aside from the news from January 21st about the pilot and 6 additional scripts being ordered, there was barely anything to learn for a long time. It was not until March 10th that the Honolulu Star Bulletin reported on the upcoming production on Oahu. On March 18th, 2004, the Bulletin also released the first images from the set, where the fuselage was constructed. This was nevertheless enough for Ren Robles, a young man from the Philippines, to launch LostTV.com on March 20th, 2004, the first fan site for Lost where every little piece of information was going to be compiled, including a message board with discussions and theories about what was really going on this island. This happened without Robles or anybody else even knowing if the pilot would ever see the light of day. But the chances of that happening were actually not great, because of all the drama behind the scenes at the Disney company that would eventually result in major consequences for a lot of people. A big factor was the ongoing Save Disney campaign by Roy Disney and Stanley Gold, who got a good amount of media attention. Their efforts were not in vain. This became more clear in early March 2004 at the annual shareholders meeting, when a total of 43% of the shareholders opposed the re-election of Michael Eisner. The time of Eisner as the head of Disney was undoubtedly coming to an end. That alone was an important step, but Roy Disney didn't stop there. To enforce change, he stayed on course, publicly naming all the problems at the company, and he didn't hold back.
Michael Eisner is behaving like a third-world dictator of a once great country, utilizing political carrots and sticks to manipulate the electorate. And his cabinet sits mute for fear of beheading. Let that sink in. More importantly, it must acknowledge the major failures of the ABC network, operating income losses of $1 billion over the last 6 years.
The message was clear. Something needed to happen, and not just at ABC, if people didn't want their own heads to roll. This was, of course, no news to Robert Iger. Just a few weeks earlier, he spoke at an investors' conference in Florida about ABC and the lacking success of the network. While he even took personal responsibility for the situation, he also put the blame on other people, as he was not responsible for the programming and had other things to take care of. He didn't mention Lloyd Braun by name, though. Instead, he praised his colleague Susan Lyne, who supposedly had the goods to turn ABC around. According to Iger, this wasn't meant to send a message to Braun. Whether that was true or not is unclear. Braun was anything but oblivious to the resistance against him and Lost from above. The chances of ABC actually picking up this show were rather low. For this reason, Braun met with Peter Roth, the chief executive of Warner Bros. Television, in early March to try to find a new home for Lost. Braun allegedly promised Roth that he could transfer the pilot from ABC and Touchstone to another studio if the costs were covered. Roth is said to have liked the script, but he had to turn down the offer in the end, as this approach was pretty unconventional and didn't seem very legitimate due to the fact that Braun was still under contract with Disney and ABC for 2 more years. Shortly thereafter, and likely a result of this failed endeavor, Braun reached out to Kevin Brockman, head of ABC's Media Relations Department, informing him that he would be ready and willing to leave ABC if it was handled properly, with the mutual understanding that this message would then be passed on to Bob Iger. With him detached from ABC, the chances of Lost getting on the air somewhere else might have become bigger. Since he was very frustrated and didn't have much of a future at ABC anyway, he basically didn't have anything to lose, so it was a risk well worth taking to make his little dream come true. He then left for Hawaii for a few days to observe the production of the pilot.
And then Lloyd came down to Hawaii with his family while we were shooting the pilot. In fact, it was the day that we were shooting Charlie and Kate and Jack getting to the cockpit and running into Greg Grunberg. That's one of the days, and before he gets yanked out by the monster. That was one of the days that I remember Lloyd being there. And Lloyd was like, I'm so excited, this show is going to be a huge hit. I'm so happy about it. But I'm probably not going to be president of ABC for by the time it gets on the air.
When he returned to Los Angeles on April 3, 2004, he immediately learned that his departure from ABC had already been set in motion. 2 days later, on a Monday morning, he finally got a call from Iger. Braun's time at the Disney company had come to an end, and rumors about big changes at the network began spreading in the industry. But Braun didn't just think about himself. Back in January, a few days after he commissioned the pilot of Lost based on the outline, he had turned to Tom Sherman, who supported him from the very beginning of this project. He didn't just warn him about the major changes that he suspected were coming, but also directly suggested him to get a new job. But it wasn't just any job, as Abrams wanted to turn his Bad Robot banner into an actual production studio. Both he and Braun thought that Sherman would be a good fit to take on a job there. By February 4th, 2004, he left ABC and became co-president with Brian Burke to head Bad Robot. For Susan Lyne, Braun's main partner at ABC, the situation was somewhat different. On March 26, 2004, when Braun was still in Hawaii, she met with Iger to have a conversation about her future at the company. He told her there was going to be some restructuring. Braun would leave while she would take over his duties and oversee the young and emerging Mark Shapiro from ESPN, who would join ABC. She was, unlike Braun, very popular with everyone and had landed Desperate Housewives, a series that seemed to be very promising and that everybody had high hopes for. Just 2 weeks later, on April 8th, Lyne was called into Eisner's office. Eisner asked her what she thought about Stephen McPherson. She only had nice words for him, but was also confused why McPherson was part of the discussion, when Shapiro was already part of the plan. Shapiro was, however, already out of the picture due to details about him joining ABC leaking to the press, which Eisner was reportedly furious about. Lyne was not sure what to make of this, but had another meeting the same day with Iger. When she told him about that meeting, he could not believe that Eisner would undermine him so hard. Iger suspected that Eisner was already talking to McPherson just as he was speaking with Lyne. He nevertheless assured her that she would get the job. She was very valued at the company, and nobody was really interested in McPherson taking over. 11 days later, however, everything changed.
And I had a very unusual time at ABC towards the end, because my whole executive team was let go.
Iger had to tell Lyne that they had decided not to go with her and that she had to give up her position at ABC. Heather Caden, who was responsible for bringing Abrams and Lindelof together, also left ABC and joined Warner Bros. Television soon after. On April 20th, 2004, the Walt Disney Company officially announced via press release that Lloyd Braun and Susan Lyne were leaving the company to pursue other interests. Stephen McPherson was announced as their successor, which was perceived to be very confusing and odd by the industry, especially due to the timing of the announcement. The upfronts, where the networks would announce the programming for the upcoming TV season, were less than a month away. McPherson thus had barely any time to get comfortable in his new position. Along with Eisner and Iger, he was also not very keen on Lost, and with him being in control of ABC's programming, the future for Braun's project looked even worse than ever before. Because of this, they wanted to pick up on Braun's previous justification for the enormously high budget and do some damage control by airing Lost as a simple TV movie.
Well, Lost, because we made it as a 2-hour, if it did not get on the air, it was going to be aired as a movie. So we had to have an alternative ending.
What was the alternative ending? I didn't know there was an alternative ending.
There really wasn't one.
That was, however, almost impossible without major changes to the story. Since Braun wasn't at ABC anymore, he was no longer responsible and no longer had to worry about Abrams and Lindelof coming up with an alternate ending for the pilot. This, however, didn't stop his successor from requesting one during the filming stage.
A very weird experience, because we had essentially 11 weeks to write it, cast it, shoot it, cut it, post it, and turn it in. And we had an outline that we had written in a few days. And it was a scramble. We were casting it as we were writing it, and we were location scouting as we were finishing the script. And it was just nuts. And in the middle of shooting the pilot, the head of ABC was fired.
Okay.
And the new person came in while we were shooting, and they said, could you shoot an ending so we can air it as a TV movie? And I said, if you can tell me how to end this show, what that scene is, I will shoot it for you. And I never heard back.
Abrams and Lindelof never actually entertained the idea to come up with a new ending for the pilot, and only joked about it.
We never entertained it. I mean, I do remember them asking us to figure out a way to make it a TV movie, like to just end it. And JJ just absolutely refused to even enter into the conversation, because we had designed this all the time that we were developing it. The note kept coming back of like, how are you going to sustain this? How is it going to be a series? How can you keep it going so that it's not just Gilligan's Island? So we designed the pilot to have all these really compelling mysteries. You know, who's that bald guy sitting on the edge of the beach that doesn't talk? Like, what is the relationship between Michael and Walt? Like, why, whose handcuffs are those? You know, what's that letter that Sawyer's reading? Why is there a polar bear on the island? So the whole thing was basically designed to create enough questions to power a season. And then, and I remember the joke that we told when we were asked to do that was like that the ending of the pilot is they hear the monster again, and then they look through the brush, and then a big tractor, like just a tractor, comes through the brush, and there's just a couple of guys driving it, and they're like, "Hey, you guys are in Hawaii," and then the show just ends, and it was like that's how ridiculous the ending would be if we tried to do it.
Without a new alternative ending, the Lost pilot would likely never have had the chance to be aired by itself on ABC. If the new leadership at the network decided, despite the initial concerns, to give this island story a chance, they would definitely have to invest even more money to produce at least some kind of follow-up in the form of a sequel or even a miniseries. Abrams, Lindelof, and their crew, however, first had to prove that the material they shot would actually work as a film, and they were running out of time to do just that.